Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 50th webinar on a treatise on cosmic fire. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheading Moria Federation Webinars, then webinar series in progress as shown here. All episodes of this, the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar series you wish to view. You may join any of these webinars on the home page of Moria Federation, little panel up at the upper left-hand corner that currently also includes Dwayne Carpenter's webinar series, Awakening the Higher Mind. Okay, last month we continued with this subheading, with the subsection, I should say, entitled The Centers and the Senses, Normal and Supernormal. We began our last session with a study of the Buddhic senses of sound, Buddhic sense of sound, called by DK comprehension, which DK also describes as, quote, that synthetic quality called telepathy. All the Buddhic plane senses represent a fundamental shift from a means for apprehending the not-self, which characterizes senses found on the physical, astral, and mental planes, to a means of expanding one's initiate consciousness. From portals to the outer world, to portals onto the inner realities. For example, hearing at this level, at the Buddhic level, involves a knowledge and complete unification of both individual and group sound, which leads to, quote, the most perfect comprehension and is the secret of the master's power. So there is, of course, it's a certain inner quality of group expression that DK describes as group sound, that when that is blended with the individual sound, which we have a better sense of, ultimately that's the sound of the still small voice of the soul, but when expanded to include this quality of group vibration, which synthesizes the whole, synthesizes the group nature, then this leads to, quote, the most perfect comprehension. How it might be a secret of the master's power is interesting to consider. We have to think in terms of the expression of sound and the ability to hear the devas, and therefore to be able to wield the building potencies. Okay, anyway, we then took a look at sound on the Atmic plane, called by DK beatitude, where we learned that beatitude always follows upon realization of the unity of the part with the whole, and that it represents a, quote, response to the human heart, of the human heart to the heart of God. You could say that's the ultimate and final level of the this sense of hearing, which that allows a connection or a response. The connection between the human heart and the heart of God, or the heart of deity, heart of the monad. We then took a look at a long footnote from Thoughts on the Gita, where we learned that sound is the chief agency used by the dhyanis to create the lower 5 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. The author, who identifies himself only as a Brahman Fellow of the Theosophical Society, goes on to say, the various karmic agencies wielded by man in the way of molding himself and surroundings, sound or speech is the most important. For to speak is to work in ether, which of course rules the lower quaternary of elements, air, fire, water, and earth. And also from this, we have human sound or language contains all the elements required to move the different classes of devas, and those elements are, of course, the vowels and the consonants. So we explored this idea last time. Next, we began a study of the sense of touch, where we learned that being the second sense, touch is, quote, a sense of very great importance in this second solar system, a system of astral Buddhic consciousness. Then we learned that touch functions through three qualities: recognition, memory, and anticipation, all of which require the mind to correlate one's experience. And that it is these three qualities of touch that relate us to the past, present, and future. Past with memory, present with recognition, and future through anticipation. DK then tells us that when an initiate has transcended time and can, quote, look at the three lower planes from the standpoint of the eternal now, for he has superseded the sense of full active consciousness, he knows and needs not the senses to guide him any longer to knowledge. Parallel to this transformation of an initiate's experience of time is a shift from reception through five senses to a reception by means of the sixth and seventh, the correlative and synthetic senses. We might hypothesize that as long as one still gathers information through the separated senses, one is also under the spell of past, present, and future. MDR makes the point that astrologically this represents the transition from Saturn, time, space, sense, separation, and sequence, to Uranus, simultaneity, essence, fusion, and synthesis. Next, DK gives us a statement on each sense, noting that hearing gives man an idea of relative direction, touch gives man an idea of relative quantity, sight gives man an idea of proportion, taste gives man an idea of value, and smell gives man an idea of innate quality. DK then reiterates that, quote, the whole object of the senses is to reveal the not self, and to enable the self, therefore, to differentiate between the real and the unreal. This leads to another long footnote, this one taken from Arthur Avalon's The Serpent Power, where we learned about the five organs of sensation called Jnanendriya, and the five organs of action called Karmendriya. The important point here being that the latter group is the means by which karma is both accrued and worked off. Avalon then makes a distinction between an organ of sensation and the sense itself. So between an organ of sensation and the sense itself, quote, the indriya or sense is not the physical organ, but the faculty of mind operating through that organ as its instrument. He then makes a further point that, quote, a yogi may accomplish by the mind only all that may be done by means of these physical organs without the use of the latter. And this takes us up to where we left off last time. So we'll begin this section with the last statement of the footnote from Arthur Avalon, but I want to encourage you to participate today. Anytime you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and we'll get to you. It's always more interesting to have dialogue than monologue. Okay, so the last statement from Arthur Avalon's Serpent Power: just as manas is necessary to the senses, the latter are necessary for manas. Manas is thus the leading indriya of which the senses are powers. So without mind, the info that the senses provide is not registered. But also, without the senses, the mind is incapable of relational thinking, which we could argue is thinking at all, since all thinking is relational. Avalon expands on this thought. The passage begins with the statement we just read, the last sentence of the footnote. Can we get a reader, please?
Barbara, do you want to read?
Yes. Just as manas is necessary to the senses, indriya, the latter are necessary for manas, for the latter is the seat of desire and cannot exist by itself. It is a desire to perceive or act, and therefore exists in association with the indriyas. Manas is thus the leading indriya of which the senses are powers. For without the aid and attention of manas, the other indriyas are incapable of performing their respective offices. And as these indriyas are those of perception and action, manas, which cooperates with both, is said to partake of the character of both cognition and action. Manas, through association with the eye or other sense, becomes manifold, being particularized or differentiated by its cooperation with that particular instrument, which cannot fulfill its function except in conjunction with manas. This is from the Serpent Power.
Thank you, Barbara. Any thoughts or questions about this? You know, it's interesting to try to contemplate what the mind would be, how it could possibly function without the five senses. You know, whether it could function at all. Okay. Back to the text. Can we get a reader, please?
Gordon, you want to read?
In the evolution of the senses, hearing is the first vague something which calls the attention of the apparently blind self, A, to another vibration, B, to something originating outside of itself, C, to the concept of externality. When sound is first contacted, the consciousness for the first time becomes aware of that which is without. But all that is grasped by the dormant consciousness by means of this one sense of hearing is the fact of something extraneous to itself and of the direction in which that something lies. This apprehension, in course of time, falls into being another sense, that of touch. The law of attraction works with consciousness moves slowly outwards towards that which is heard. And when contact is made with the not self, it is called touch.
Thank you, Gordon. First, In the evolution of the senses, hearing is the first vague something which calls the attention of the apparently blind self. So notice how when the Tibetan doesn't want to define a term, he uses the word something or that, as in hearing is the first vague something, meaning that hearing is the first sense to attract the isolated attention of the indwelling jiva, who is not in these early stages of development consciously related yet to his new environment. Hearing is thus the first of the senses to draw the jiva's attention outwards towards the environment. Yes, Yvonne.
I just wanted to mention something. They always tell us in nursing for the patients that hearing is the last thing that leaves them when they're dying. So it's interesting. It's the first thing to come and the last thing to leave.
Oh, that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they can be completely unresponsive
And still here, yes.
and still hear, right?
Interesting.
It is interesting. It makes you wonder about that. It's like there's an end drawing, and then finally the very first becomes the last to disappear. Yeah. Okay. So the Tibetan describes the self as the apparently blind self, suggesting that the indweller is not intrinsically blind, but rather blind in this initial stage of development to the world of appearances. This stage recurs during the first root race of every globe, because that's it's during the first root race that hearing comes into being before any of the others. Next, in evolution of the senses, hearing is the first vague something which calls the attention of the apparently blind self to another vibration, to something originating outside of itself, to the concept of externality. When sound is first contacted, the consciousness for the first time becomes aware of that which is without. So it is through sound that the imprisoned jiva, who is up to this point unaware of anything or anyone outside him or herself, is introduced to the concept of otherness, of any external reality. And he or she does this through sensing the vibration caused by sound and received through hearing. It's interesting to think of how these senses unfold in an infant, and while still in utero, it's known that long before the eyes are developed at all, for instance, that the embryo responds to the sound of its mother's voice and to other external sounds. I mean, remember that phase where everybody thought that if they played Mozart during a woman's pregnancy, that it would give the child this great advantage when it finally appeared. And then, of course, once the child does come out of the womb, then you have immediately the sense of touch coming forward. But the eye is not so much yet. It's just in those very initial stages, and that's doesn't really come in until later. MDR gives us astrological insights on this idea about hearing as the initial sense. I see Maria Christina. Yes.
How fascinating.
Yeah.
I just, um, it makes you wonder, the senses and the mind are very symbiotic relationship with each other, yes? It
Yes.
would seem.
Oh, yes.
And yet, and so after death, the mind goes into goes in. I just wondered, I thought, huh,
Hmm.
maybe it turns its attention in another direction. I don't know. Does the mind continue to exist
Well, yes, I
within
think
the
it does.
realms of the egoic lotus?
You
Maybe just
move
as
out of,
permanent atoms. I don't know.
well, you move out of brain, but the connection is soul, mind, brain. That's what one attempts to line up in order to build the antascarana. So when you die, you lose the brain, and you're projected into mind consciousness. For those who are more advanced, who are initiate consciousness, there's no loss of awareness. You are, because you have already been working in mind, and you're immediately introduced to the senses of the astral sheath, right? So you find
Right.
yourself in the astral sheath, uh, and using those senses. For instance, we learned last time that in the astral sheath, one hears through over one's entire astral body. It's not just by ears, it's the whole body. And then as one progresses back to the soul, you would come into awareness of your mental senses, before return to the soul. So I think for average human, that there would be, the consciousness wouldn't be there. The alive awareness wouldn't be present during the transition.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. Okay, so MDR gives us some insights on the idea of hearing as the initial sense. Could we get a reader, please?
Janet,
One must compare the meaning of the concept of externality with the meaning of Saturn and Earth signs, such as Capricorn, which Saturn rules. Capricorn, the third ray lord, and Saturn are closely related to the presentation to consciousness of the illusion of time and space. The senses are centrifugal rather than centripetal. Mars is the centrifugal planet, and interesting, the five senses are ruled by Mars. The senses also relate most specifically to the astral plane, over which Mars has a definite, if incomplete, rulership. Thirdly, Mars governs the senses, which are 5 in number. These senses are basis of all human knowledge, for that which is tangible and objective is concerned or inferred. Mars therefore rules science, and hence the reason in his present era for the fundamental but not permanent, page 216, materiality of science, a materiality which is rapidly lessened as Mars nears the end of its present cycle influence.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, any thoughts or questions about this? Interesting, isn't it? That Mars rules the senses, and because it rules the senses, it therefore rules science, because science is, you could say, knowledge through science is gained through the senses, very largely the sense of sight. Okay, next up. But all that is grasped by the dormant consciousness by means of this one sense of hearing is the fact of something extraneous to itself. and of the direction in which that something lies. Yes, and Veronica.
May I ask, in the previous slide, what makes Mars centrifugal, and is there a planet that is centripetal? I'm sorry if I'm not saying that correctly.
Yeah, well, this has to do with the outgoing nature, centrifugal. If you spin something, it wants to move outwards, right? And that's orientation is towards the material world. So it's not for instance, anything to do with the nature of Mars's orbit or anything like that. Centrifugal draws energy inwards, right? For instance, this is eventually the relationship between the head center and the soul, is that it draws one's consciousness inwards towards the soul, whereas centrifugal motion moves one outward into manifestation. Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Right. So here's a statement that the only thing that's gained is through sound, is that there's something out there, right? And the direction in which that something lies. I thought about this. I think the only other thing that you might be able to determine is through pitch. You might be able to determine get some sense of the size of something. If a sound is quite deep and rumbling, it's going to be larger than otherwise. But, if as yet you only have the sense of sound, then that sense of relative size probably wouldn't even be established within oneself yet, right? It would only be correlative, for instance, to the sense of sight or touch, that it could play a part in determining size. So I see a couple of hands here. And Veronica? And Veronica, do you have your hand up?
No, Tia.
Oh, Tia, sorry. No, and Veronica just spoke. I'm sorry. Yes,
It
Tia.
wasn't me. I was trying to find my mic to open it up. It wasn't me.
Sorry, Tia. Yes.
I was gonna say, I would like to take an educated guess in response to Veronica's question. If Mars is representative of the centrifugal force and it's moving out into manifestation, then I would hasten to guess. I mean, if you look at HPV and what Michael was talking about in the Secret Doctrine, he alluded that indigo blue is the synthetic color represented by Venus, which is the A note. So it would be more of the centripetal force, thinking of it as a synthetic motion. And then you can't really think about sound and color and vibration without thinking and involution, without thinking of the Deva kingdom and how their use of sound and color is opposite ours. Like they hear colors as opposed to seeing them. And so it's really interesting how these these interchanges mix and form in the evolution and involution of our system.
Yeah, good point. It would be interesting to go through each of the notes and determine the directional nature of it. But it's also going to be you'd have to put it in context. There's inherent quality, and then there's that quality in context to whatever's going on. A creator God using the note It would be possibly in combination. For instance, he might use the synthetic note in combination with the form creating note in order to have the molecules of that form adhere to each other. So it's it's a deep study. There's a whole field, sashia or something like that, in Hinduism that it's a whole yoga that studies these methods of using sound. Thank you, Tia. And Tom, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking about music, and it says dormant consciousness just gets something outside and direction. So where would you put music in that? Would it be under direction or pitch, or how do you send you hear it with your ears?
Well, it's what he's describing here is the evolution of the appearance of sound, whereas music would be after the appearance. The evolution or appearance of the senses, whereas music comes in after all five senses have been established and actually stimulates in many ways all aspects of all the senses, though it still primarily depends on hearing in order to be perceived. I think one who only had the sense of hearing, would they be able to really comprehend music if that was their only portal into the outer world? I wonder about that. Or if so, the music would be of a very, very different nature than it is in this root race. So music is in this root race, at least, fifth root race, where sight is the dominant sense, just as feeling was, or touch in the Atlantean root race, and sound in the Lemurian root race. Then I think you would be looking at a conglomeration that expresses itself through the sense of sound. In other words, all that has been gained through all the senses is part of our musical landscape that then is channeled through the sense of sound. Yes, Barbara.
Yes, according to a recent neurological studies, the mind using sound needs a conductor. That it isn't just if we operated on a collection of sounds, there would be no unity, no intentionality. That at every moment, we have to create not only with sound, but color and the other senses, a unified picture that is from the place of a wise conductor. So although things are being taken apart here so that we have the sense of each one, that our minds could not use any of these senses unless there's a conductor.
Yeah, well, one could actually make the argument that the mind is the conductor. But if you shift it up yet another step, it is the soul that conducts the mind unconsciously at first and later consciously, that then changes one experience of sound progressively. The mind, one's experience of sound progresses according to the interface between mind and sound, and eventually between soul slash mind and sound. For instance, sound is the means by which we perceive the still small voice of the soul. That's the first method of contact to the soul as well. Thank you, Barbara, for that. It's very interesting. All of these senses are only possible, as we learned in that section from the serpent power, through interaction with mind. Okay. Finally, this apprehension in course of time calls into being another sense, that of touch. The law of attraction works. The consciousness moves slowly outward towards that which is heard. And when contact is made with the not self, it is called touch. Interesting definition. So, through hearing, the law of attraction compels one to move towards that which is heard, but for the purpose of making physical contact, thus further confirming the existence of that which was originally perceived through hearing. Just as hearing is associated with the first root rays, the second sense is associated with this second root rays, whose etheric bodies are the first to develop definite boundaries, thus making touch possible. Any thoughts? Questions? Okay. Next up, could we get a reader, please? Yes, Tia.
I know these are all big, big, big issues, but it's just so interesting to me. If you go back to the previous one, the law of attraction, and thinking of, indigo blue and the color of synthesis being our solar system, and the relationship that it represents Venus, and the relationship of the Earth to Venus, right? And that the solar angels come from Venus, and they're responsible for our soul. And then when you think about that in relation to how these particular vibrations are, I would almost say an opposite, when you think about the involutionary and the evolutionary chains of development, and you compare them, it's really what Master DK calls Venus, our divine complement. It's so interesting that we can't really get into it, but how its relationship to us must play a significant role in how these senses are developed,
Don't you know it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, Venus came through the second chain, which is the Venus chain. No, let me say that again. Sanat Kumara came to us via the second chain and the second globe of that chain to the second globe of our present chain, the fourth chain. And this was facilitated, again, the numbers always work. This is the second sense, and the second chain and the second globe very much suggest that the sense of touch that is present between Venus and the Earth facilitated that transfer of Sanat Kumara. Now, DK doesn't say that directly, and when he talks about Sanat coming to the Earth, but certainly, that reaching out to make contact is a function of the sense of touch that would have facilitated that transfer from Sanat Kumara to the Earth. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? You really have to decentralize this idea of the sense of touch being, you put your finger on something, that it's the subjective nature of the sense that you have to hold in mind to get a fuller understanding of what these senses represent. Anyone else? Thanks, Dia. That's great stuff. Okay. Can we get a reader, please?
Kirsten.
This touch conveys other ideas to the groping consciousness, ideas of size, of external texture, and of surface differences. The concept of the thinker is thus slowly enlarged. He can hear and feel, but as yet knows not enough to correlate nor name. When he succeeds in naming, he has made a big stride forward. We might note here, therefore, that the earliest cosmic symbols are applicable to the senses as well as elsewhere. The point in the center, consciousness, and the not self at a stage where sound alone is descriptive. The divided circle consciousness aware of the not self through a dual recognition.
Thank you. Okay. So first, this touch conveys other ideas to the groping consciousness, ideas of size, of external texture, and of surface differences. The concept of the thinker is thus slowly enlarged. The word groping specifically suggests one who is yet unable to see. That's how we usually use the term. But it also conveys the idea of an incipient consciousness struggling to more effectively engage with its environment in order to better know the not self. We're here told that 3 new outer realities are brought into the jiva's scope of consciousness through touch. The concepts of size, texture, and surface differences, the latter 2 of which are completely unavailable through the sense of hearing. Next, yes, Yvonne.
Makes so much sense. Groping, because you can't see. You have to grope to see what it is.
Yeah, that's right. I would think that, for those, we all know that blind people have extremely highly developed senses in order to compensate for their blindness. And, we normally think of hearing, but I would think that the spatial sense that comes through touch is also much, much enhanced as a result. Like you hear people, of blind people being able to see somebody's face by minutely touching the whole face, and it literally forms a picture in their mind. Okay. So next we have he can hear and feel, but is yet not enough to correlate nor name. When he succeeds in naming, he has made a big stride forward. Naming, which is made possible by correlating, then synthesizing into a unified understanding that which has been perceived, is a mental function, initially instinctual, but nonetheless mental. Badike seems to here suggest that hearing and touch in and of themselves do not yet provide enough info for naming to occur. I think, both sight and naming are synthetic. And that's why it's not until the next sense that comes in. Next, We might note here, therefore, that the earliest cosmic symbols are applicable to the senses as well as elsewhere. So thus far, we've applied the 5 cosmic symbols to the development of the form aspect during the stages of involution, beginning with complete homogeneity, and then the impulsing outwards of the life force, and then progressively into denser stages of materiality, and also to the evolutionary development of the chakras, which is the circle representing a completely quiescent, inactive chakra. And then the rotation begins when the central point appears, which always represents the life aspect at the center of the demonstration. And then these are actually specific symbols that represent progressive stages of the chakra until you get to the unfolding of the chakra. Till when you finally get to the swastika, it means fourth dimensional motion or wheel turning upon itself. This circle with the cross represents active 3-dimensional motion. Hang on a sec. Yeah. So now DK applies these same symbols to the 5 senses, interestingly. So first, the point in the center, consciousness and the not self at a stage where sound alone is descriptive. Given this is the starting point, we might hypothesize that the circle with no point represents the indwelling jiva completely imprisoned in form, but as yet unable to contact or even conceive of otherness. Thus, such a one is literally senseless, right? The stage actually may not even exist for human beings, at least for human beings. For it could be that hearing is present even in the earliest stages of embodiment. The point within the circle in this context represents the birth of the idea of externality. You have the receptive point and you have the ring past not that represents externality. And that externality is gained through an apprehension of sound coming from outside one's ring past not. There's no description of ears or any other organ of reception for the first root race where hearing is first experienced, where it's the only sense. Since human forms in this root race are so amorphous, it's possible that just as with the astral body, that hearing is perceived over the entire body during one's sojourn in the first root race. Next, the divided circle. Consciousness aware of the not self through a dual recognition. So the diameter creates a bridge from the isolated point to the ring past not of the jiva. The divided circle also suggests the self and the not self, not separated, but touching, for each of them as semicircles share the same common diameter. Touch is necessarily based upon division, but requires that a divided duality be in close or immediate contact. And next, could we get a reader, please?
Magda, you want to read?
Sight follows on this, the third sense, and the one definitely marking the correlation of ideas or the relation between. It parallels the coming of mind, both in time and function. We have hearing, touch, or feeling, and then sight. In connection with the correspondence, it is to be noted that sight came in with the third root race in this round, and that the third race saw also the coming in of the mind. The self and the not self were immediately correlated and coordinated. Their close partnership became an accomplished fact, and evolution hastened forward with renewed impetus. These three major senses, if I might so describe them, are very definitely allied, each with one of the three logoi.
Thank you, Magda. Okay, first, sight follows on this, the third sense, and the one definitely marking the correlation of ideas or the relation between. It parallels the coming of mind, both in time and function. Presumably, the sense of sight is symbolized by the addition of a vertical line, thus creating the cross within the circle. This is appropriate, for it is through the spark of manas that we can connect the below to the above, and that we can eventually reach into the domain of the soul. Next, we have hearing, touch, or feeling, and then sight. In connection with the correspondence, it is to be noted that sight came in with the third root race in this round, and that the third race saw also the coming in of mind. Sight and mind are reciprocally developed, which is why both are associated with the third root race, when the spark of mind was planted in the indwelling Jiva through the sacrifice of the Manasaputras. After this great event, humanity began to correlate and synthesize data received through the senses, which led to the development of language and with it, the ability to name. Thoughts or questions? Yeah, I didn't actually, I didn't address this last sentence. It really struck me, last part of this sentence. It struck me this time through. It parallels the coming of mind, both in time, well, I just described that because it comes in through the third race, and function. And so the nature of the sense of sight is synthetic and correlative, which is also the nature of mind. It synthesizes the stimuli into meaning. I mean, you can make an argument that all the senses do that, but the sense of sight is particularly so in this way. And so they parallel each other in this way. We're in the fifth root race, and so very much the sense of sight is that which is being most developed. Okay. So yes. Next, the self and the not self were immediately correlated and coordinated. Their close partnership became an accomplished fact, and evolution hastened forward with new impetus. The work began in Lemuria, continued in Atlantis, during which the sense of touch, exemplified through feeling, became the focus of exploring the not self. In this, you've heard that the Atlanteans were particularly emotionally focused. In this Aryan root race, we are further exploring the sense of sight in conjunction with the nature of mind. both through an exhaustive scientific exploration of the not-self, which has taken us to the threshold of the heretofore unseen realms, both microscopic and macroscopic realms that can only be contacted through the sense of sight, and through the visual arts, which link both mind and emotions to our visual field. Yes, Barbara.
Yes, so sight, light implies the rays, and with the rays come the Platonic solids. So, while the previous geometry that you showed was two-dimensional, the rays permit three-dimensional and the containment of space. And then with that containment of space with the Platonic solids, there is an inside and an outside. So I think there's a whole level of sophistication that comes in with the rays.
Yeah, and through the sense of sight. Well, you make some great points there, Barbara. First of all, sight allows us to see color, the 7 colors, which are literally the energies of the 7 rays, right? So we have the literal light rays, but it also links us with that subjective, qualitative nature of the 7 rays through those color expressions, right? And then your other point, the fact that we could explore the form world in such a way that we would eventually conceive of the Platonic solids and their philosophical meaning is directly connected with the idea of sight. And you could see how sight and mind are so closely related, and especially in that latter case. Yeah, great points. Anyone else? This is great. It's what makes these webinars more interesting. Okay. Next up, these 3 major senses, if I might so describe them, are very definitely allied, each with one of the 3 logoi. In this Treatise on Cosmic Fire chart, we see the life waves of the 3 logoi. The first life wave, called here the evolution of matter, is associated with hearing, the second with touch, and the third with sight. And we'll be getting back to this chart in a minute. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
And Veronica, you want to read?
Hearing, the recognition of the fourfold world, the activity of matter, the 3rd logos. Touch, the recognition of the 7-fold form builder, the gathering together of forms, the approximation and interrelation, the 2nd logos. The law of attraction between the self and the not-self begins to work. Sight, the recognition of totality, the synthesis of all, the realization of the one in many, the 1st logos. The law of synthesis operating between all forms which the self occupies and the recognition of the essential unity of all manifestation by the means of sight.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute. Thank you, Veronica. Okay. Okay. That the province of the 2nd logos, who implements the evolution of form, is touch, and that sight is employed by the 1st logos to draw humanity into the higher realms. Excuse me, just a minute. Okay, sorry guys, getting my ducks in a row here. Here first we have hearing, the recognition of the fourfold word, the activity of matter, the third logos. DK here tells us that the third logos, whose life wave is concerned with the evolution of matter, implements this descent into the lower quaternary through sound. This is beautifully illustrated in stanza 2 of the stanzas of John from A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. Could we get a reader, please?
Marianne, you want to read?
Om, said the mighty one, and sounded forth the word. The sevenfold waves of matters resolved themselves, and varied forms appeared. Each took its place, each in the sphere ordained. They waited for the sacred flood to enter and to fill. The builders responded to the sacred sound. In musical collaboration, they attended to the work. They built in many spheres, beginning with the third. Upon this plane, their work commenced. They built the sheet of Atma and strung it to its primary.
Thank you, Marianne. Okay, note that the sense associated with the quote-unquote sheath of Atma, also called the nirvanic plane, is sound. In a description of how Fohat manifests on each of the subplanes of the cosmic physical plane, DK says, on the third plane, that intelligent principle, talking about Fohat, demonstrates as coherent activity, either systemic, planetary, or monadic, and also as the triple vibration of spirit, matter, intelligence, sounding as the threefold sacred word, or electricity manifesting as sound. Okay, next, touch. The recognition of the sevenfold form builder, the gathering together of forms, their approximation and interrelation, the second logos. The law of attraction between the self and the not-self begins to work. The province of the second logos includes forms on all 7 of the subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. The sense of touch facilitates the building and interrelation of forms and is associated involutionally with the Buddhic plane and evolutionally with the astral plane. Next, sight, the recognition of totality, the synthesis of all, the realization of the one in many, the first logos, the law of synthesis, operating between all forms which the self occupies, and the recognition of the essential unity of all manifestation by means of sight. So, first, the seer experiences a unified field of vision through use of the right and left eyes. Later, through implementation of his inner sight, a realization of synthesis supersedes this duality. The disciple then builds the antikarana, and through its construction comes under influence of the first logos, who is associated with this sense of sight. We can see how both the first and fifth rays are related to the sense of sight, and thus to synthesis ruled by Uranus. The second and sixth rays to the relational sense of touch, and thus to duality ruled by Neptune. And the third and seventh rays to the locational quality of hearing, and thus to multiplicity ruled by Saturn. Notice that both on the involutional and evolutional arc, sound is the first to manifest. Involutional from the atmic plane, evolutionally from the physical plane. Touch manifests involutionally on the Buddhic plane and evolutionally on the astral plane. Finally, sight manifests involutionally on the higher monastic subplanes and evolutionally on the lower monastic subplanes, eventually creating a synthesis that allows the indweller to progress evolutionally to the Buddhic plane, the true plane of at-one-ment, which is itself a higher function of the sense of touch. Okay. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
Mitty.
Yes. As regards taste and smell, we might call them minor senses, for they are closely allied to the important sense of touch. They are practically subsidiary to that sense. This second sense and its connection with this second solar system should be carefully pondered over. It is predominantly the sense most closely connected with the second logos. This conveys a hint of much value if duly considered. It is of value to study the extensions of physical plane touch on other planes and to see whether we are led. It is the faculty which enables us to arrive at the essence by due recognition of the veiling sheath. It enables the thinker who fully utilizes it to put himself in a rapport with the essence of all selves at all stages, and thereby to aid in the due evolution of the sheath and actively to serve.
Thank you, Mady. Okay. So first up, as regards taste and smell, we might call them minor senses, for they are closely allied to the important sense of touch. They are practically subsidiary to that sense. So both taste and smell increase the sense of contact initiated through the sense of touch. For in both cases, one literally takes into one's body molecules of the not self. Thus, as further extensions of the sense of touch, they are both more intimate and more intrusive than the sense of hearing. Again, DK doesn't assign a symbol to these two senses, but we might hypothesize that the swastika, the last of the 5 symbols, is related to one or both of these senses. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay. All right, next up. This second sense and its connection with the second solar system should be carefully pondered over. It is predominantly the sense most closely allied with the second logos. This conveys a hint of much value if duly considered. So you may remember in the beginning of the section on touch, DK states, we must note that this sense is preeminently the sense, the sense of very great importance in this second solar system, a system of astral Buddhic consciousness. The footnote referencing this statement states, astral Buddhic consciousness is the term applied to the basic consciousness in our solar system. It is characterized by emotion, by feeling, sensation, which have eventually to be transmuted into intuition, spiritual perception, and unity. Since the intuition is the sense of taste on the Buddhic plane, this footnote suggests that we must transmute touch into a higher sense of taste, which, if you remember, DK tells us is a subsidiary of the sense of touch, thereby bridging from astral to Buddhic consciousness. MDR further expands on this topic. Could we get a reader, please?
Nisa. Okay. Scott.
We do live in a solar system wherein the sense of touch is predominant. This reveals to us that we do not yet live in a solar system of vision. Correspondingly, our solar logos has not yet taken the third cosmic initiation, see TCF 384, which liberates the sense of sight. It may well be the logos of Sirius, who conveys to our solar system, or solar logos, the necessary enhancement of the sense of sight, which would make sight the characteristic sense of this solar system. Similarly, it is Venus who conveys to our planetary logos the necessary enhancement of the sense of sight, which would make sight the characteristic sense of the Earth scheme.
Thanks, Scott. Thoughts or questions? Comments? Okay. I actually want to go back. I don't think we fully considered this idea. See if we can stimulate our conversation here. He says, the second sense and its connection with this second solar system should be carefully pondered over. It is predominantly the sense most closely connected with the second logos. Where is that? Here it is. This conveys a hint of much value if duly considered. So, we have to consider why. Why is this? What is the hint he's trying to bring forward here? Again, we have to lift our understanding of these senses to their subjective correspondence, right? For instance, the sense of touch on the Buddhic plane is healing, on the Atmic plane is active service, right? So both of these are means by which evolution becomes possible. And it thus suggests that the purpose the purpose of this solar system and of the second logos is hardwired to these qualities of healing, of evolution through healing and active service. Anybody else have any ideas as to what he may be alluding to in terms of the connection between the sense of touch and the second solar system? There is one other thing that actually he gets into a little later. We'll probably get to it in the next session, which is it's the sense of touch that actually allows for the surging upward of the Kundalini fires. That quality that you could say inhabits the sense of touch is what compels the triangles of matter, for instance, to connect with and merge with the triangle of prana, and then for those two triangles subsequently to touch interact with and eventually merge with the triangle of fire. So it almost suggests that this is the fundamental MO for evolutionary advancing in our solar system. Yes, I don't know if it's Nadell or Nadel, but anyway. Nadell? You have your hand up? Are you muted? You're muted, Nadell. I see your hand, but I'll put, oh, there you go. I'm sorry, I think I clicked right when you unmuted, so unmute again. There you go.
Okay, there. It's Nadell.
Okay, good, okay.
Just a wild guess here, but since the second solar system is one where I think we're developing the middle aspect, the soul aspect,
right?
And the soul and mind sort of connect the higher, the spirit and matter, then maybe it's touch from the middle that sort of connects these two together.
Yeah, 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 and it's inherently relational. The number 2 is inherently relational, but the sense connected with 2, the second sense, it's not a means of considering these two, the self and the non-self, as separate entities, but rather the means by which they come into relationship. So yeah, I think you're right on with that, Nadell. Thanks. Janet?
I was just thinking about in meditation deep, the impress. That's a touch.
Yeah.
You don't hear anything beforehand though. So I'm getting a little confused, but that's
Well,
nothing new.
it doesn't have to be sequential that way, you know. Yeah.
And that's when you know that things are starting to develop. If that makes sense.
It's a different experience, isn't it? You know, one who has had a sense of that impress while meditating. It is more akin to the sense of touch than anything else. I mean, the other senses can come. You know, you can hear the voice of the silence. You know, you can feel the impress, and eventually you can it can stimulate your inner vision, you know. But yes, it's a good thought. Thank you. Tia?
I think when DK talks about the fact that we live in an astral Buddhic, he's referencing this whole notion of dualism and synthesis, astral being inherently divisive and Buddhic being inherently unitive. And the fact that the sense of touch, when he says in rapport, the thinker in rapport with the essence of all selves, he's really talking about raising one's vibration to a point of unitive consciousness, which is that traversing that astral to Buddhic jump that we need to make as far as evolution is concerned. And it's the sense of touch that has the right note or the right vibration that allows us to make that evolutionary jump.
Yeah, good thoughts. Thank you, Tia. Yeah. Yeah, you even just this little bit of conversation, we start to see how intrinsic the evolutional process is to this sense. Magda.
Yes, if we place the number 1, the hearing, on the first rays polaris, and the touch on the Hyperborean, where the self and not self start touching, and then the sight on the third rays limo, where we develop the I, meaning the mind, where the karma starts working, and we have the correlation of ideas and the plane correlation of self and non-self. And then and these are the 3 major, more important senses, 1, 2, 3. And then we have here we say taste and smell, 4 and 5. Which one do you think belongs to Atlantis, fifth race, taste or smell? And air, and on the fifth race, the Aryan hour race, smell or taste? Which one of the two?
Well, DK tells us that they both are extensions, and he says even almost subsidiary to the sense of touch. So I would think that they were highly developed at the Atlantean times, and that our root race, the Aryan root races, has its focus on this sense of sight more than either smell or taste. Of course, that's subjectively speaking. All the senses have been, because mind has been so much developed during this root race. The senses are essentially the portal which comes through the name of the sense, and what the mind does with that information that's received. And since there's been such an acceleration during this root race of the processing of that information, you could certainly make an argument that all the information from all the senses have greatly accelerated. I mean, for sound, for instance, look at the composers, the 14th century, to the present, all during the Aryan root race. You could say that for the culinary arts with taste, and certainly the perfumeries around the world, that it's been raised to an extraordinary art form, So
Yeah, think of like the Proust, the French writer, The Perfume of a Woman, and all that. So I tend to think that we're developing more the perfume, the smell on the fifth race. But then, so based on what you say, the sixth and the seventh sense will not exist because on the sixth and the seventh race. Meaning, you seem to think that the three senses are the important ones, and the others are like collateral. The leftover four. They're just perfectioning it and mutating them, and but they're not other two senses, because sometimes you hear like the senses are not 5 but are 12. So I'm always confused with this thing of the senses. And then I wanted to say that the hearing, it seems obvious to me that it's the first one, basing on Genesis. The word first was the word. So and also I think at a fetal level, like baby level, and also on a cosmic level, because the hearing sound is like the first thing you hear in a solar experience, and what it gets described in the birds language and all that. So the hearing is definitely the first one, but also nothing. That's about it. 6 and 7 do not exist. So logically speaking.
Well, if you remember, DK actually gives us the sixth sense as the correlative sense, which doesn't have a portal through, eyes, nose, ears, but it's a completely mental sense, which actually correlates and makes a unity of the gained information. Seventh is the synthetic sense that brings it into a unitive experience. So 6 correlates, 7th unifies. So we might hypothesize that the next root race will strongly develop this correlative sense, and the emphasis will begin to shift off of the outer senses to the mental correlative shifts. Okay, I see we have many hands here. Let's see. Do you have them in order, Tom? Oh, I see. We have.
Yeah, and Tia, if she didn't lower her hand, but after Tia is Tom.
Okay. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I have always thought senses like in this order that they are instruments to get knowledge. So of course you start with the hearing, something is outside you, then you touch to get more information about those qualities that DK mentions. Then you get sight, you can see relations between things, and then comes taste, which you work with the information and taste it before you swallow it, and then you have valued things, the knowledge you have had, and then the mere smell gives you the information. You don't have to do the earlier process. So I see them as progressive and not just as a subdivisions of touch.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, there's something very meaningful about the fact that you literally, I mean, with taste, you ingest the other, the not self, which brings in, a level of knowing that the three basic senses, which stay outside yourself always, just can't bring, and that's even a subtler form of that through smell, which you literally, there are molecules that are like, I can't remember the name of them, but they're molecules that are oriented towards, that carry odor, that you literally bring into your body. But yeah, thank you, Tom. Joe?
Listening to everyone else, I began to play with the sentence, it is of value to study the extensions of physical plane touch on other planes. And I got something that I've never seen before. That is, first of all, I was thinking when you're tasting, we can readily look at the food that you find in fast food places. And then we can find the food that we try to eat at home. And we can finally go to the epicure meal that we all just really enjoy so much. And there are different levels, and they could conceivably move to different raise 1, 2, or 3, the different levels of the three major senses.
So
Then
which Ray is fast food? Ha ha ha.
fast food is pretty. The Indians have, the Far Eastern Indians have the sense of, you have the tamasic, and then you have the rajasic, and then you have the, which one, sattvic. And I think we do that with food, and it's a crossover in identifying with different levels of awareness spiritually as well.
Yeah.
So I went another step, and with smell, I thought about it. I actually do sense smells on a spiritual plane. And incense, I realize, represents to me the highest plane. And when I go to roses, I'm on the second plane. And when I go to cedar and evergreen trees of all varieties, I'm really working with earth.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's very interesting. And of course, and these senses are deeply interrelated. For instance, the sense of taste is so dependent on the sense of smell, in order to have a full experience of taste, and it's also quite tactile. So I could see the three aspects of, texture of food is of prime importance. So touch, taste, and smell, I think, are very interrelated when it comes to, the dining experience. Not so much with fast food, but, definitely in the culinary end of things, right? Thank you for that, Joe. That's going to do it for today, guys. Any last comments about what we've covered so far today?
Yes, Francis.
Go ahead, Tia.
What I would want to say is that, getting back to my point about the relation of the astral, this is all part of the evolutionary unfoldment. When you think about, even Master DK talks about the sense of smell and being able to sense the perfume of the master. that particular sense doesn't unfold until the second initiation. And so, or after, as you have gone through the second initiation, because we live in a second ray solar system, we are always having to deal with consciousness, and consciousness as it expresses with law or with spirit upon matter. So we're in the cosmic physical plane. The way we reach these, the sense of smell from the astral to the Buddhic, because he says it enables the thinker, is by the mental plane, which is developing the Antakarana. Once you are able, and so it intimates to me that this sense of touch or reaching into the Buddhic plane, or really getting a sense of it, not just flashes of it, as you might have when you're having, meditative experiences, but actually be able to anchor your consciousness there at will, or really experience a sense of touch, would not be until after the third initiation, or as you're approaching the third initiation.
Yeah. Some great thoughts. What I want to leave you all with is just imagine being able to smell the aroma of a master of wisdom. You could take that to your next meditation. What would that be like, to actually perceive the aroma of a master of wisdom? What a high state that would bring in. Okay, you all, much love. Enjoyed this webinar very much.